Hello and welcome to Chapter 4 lecture. Let's get started. So socialization is what we're going to be mainly talking about today, and I'll just read you the definition. So the process through which an individual is shaped by the values, customs, and expectations of his or her society. Socialization is very important to talk about just because you need other people. You actually can't function without other human beings. So you are constantly outsourcing the problem of your sanity to other people. And what I mean by that is you're constantly in a dialogue with other people about what is sane and what is not according to the norms and the cues of your own society. And so you actually can't deal with the problem of sanity by yourself. You can't do it. You need other people to put you in line, to tell you and to whip you into shape when you're being too crazy. And so if you're not abiding by those norms, like I said in the first lecture, people won't want to hang out with you. So you need other people. You can't function without other people. When I say need, it's not an option. Like, you go crazy if you don't have other people. And one of the things that's like the worst consequences in prison is solitary confinement. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Tom Hanks movie Castaway, but he's on an island for a long time by himself because his plane crashes, and he actually starts talking to his volleyball. Wilson! So most of what you're doing to stay sane is looking at other people and watching what they do and implementing and copying it in your own life. And I remember when I was 9 or 10 years old, I was with my mom at church, and there was a baby sitting next to me. And so I started making faces at the baby, and I started nodding my head like this. And one of the things I noticed was this baby would nod its head when I did. And then when I went like this, the baby would go like this. And it's crazy that even that young, they're taking cues from you on how to act. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about mice. And you might be asking, why would we even be talking about that? Well, rats actually share a lot of similarities to humans. So we actually share like 90 to 95% of our DNA with rats, some god-awful number like that. And this is very important because rats are used as, the lab experiment to human disease processes for years. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that they actually have a similar gene type to ours. And so what happens is they have similar reaction to diseases and drugs. So they test them on these poor little animals, and it's a good indication of what would happen to us because they share a lot of our genes and our nervous system. And one experiment they did on rats was cocaine, actually. And so what they did was they isolated a rat, and they gave the rat a little lever. And if it was isolated, it was way more likely to take more doses of cocaine per day than if the rat was with his rat friends. And so if the rat had friends, they had that social structure, they were actually less inclined to take cocaine throughout the day because they got that void filled by other rats. And so it's a good indication of what would happen to us. So isolation for a rat and isolation for a human, all that to say, it's not good for you. And I'm not just talking about excessive drug use, but I'm also talking about way worse consequences, and we'll talk about them right now. Kingsley Davis was one of the first people to report on feral children, and so this was in your book near the beginning of the chapter, and you can read about it, but it's very interesting. And he found cases of feral children, which meant that these children were not touched as kids. They weren't interacted with, and so they had too many problems to count. Like, they were almost deaf, they didn't respond to any human stimuli, there was a bunch of things wrong. You need touch from your parents, you need love, or else you will not survive, and if you do survive, you will not live a good life. And so this was also echoed in a study in Romania in the 1980s. So researchers looked at kids in orphanages compared to those who weren't. And what they found was the cortisol levels in the kids that were in the orphanages for a long period of time were spiked. So if you didn't know, cortisol is released in your body in very high stress situations. So like that of a Romanian orphanage, like when you're not getting played with, you're not getting loved, and you aren't getting that human interaction that humans need, cortisol is released in your body. The effects of cortisol is not good for your body. It's what's known as the stress hormone. And what it does is it actually, for the body, it shuts down the immune system. You're more prone to obesity. It ups the risk of cancer. It increases the likelihood of getting more disease, and it ages you faster. Studies are showing that babies who aren't touched, it doesn't just leave a lasting effect on their behavior, on their growth, of the cortisol levels, but it goes all the way down to changes in the molecular level of the DNA of the person. Being isolated and going through traumatic experiences when you're young, they leave devastating results. So when you guys are parents, you should probably just remember that, because what happens to you when you're young, it imprints on you at a molecular level. And so protect your kids once you have them. Now we're going to go over Charles Cooley's Looking Glass Self. What that is realizing, for one, how we appear to other people. For two, how we think they judge our appearance. And I'm going to expand more on number two. The thing is that we actually don't know for certain what we do look like to other people. And you guys know this. I mean, you probably know somebody who, isn't very self-aware, that talks too much, doesn't pick up on social cues. Like, if you're having an invigorating conversation between, you and another person, and a third person comes in and they just start taking over the conversation, that's an example of not being very self-aware, because you're coming in on a conversation and then you're taking over. And so that's an example of someone that's not very self-aware, that doesn't really know what they look like to other people. And so part of self-awareness is the looking glass self. It means that you need to be aware enough to guess what you look like to other people. And sometimes that's pretty hard because you don't really know. 3, using the looking glass self, you can control and manipulate responses and evaluation of other people. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit too. Number 3 is my favorite of the 3 because it's just a crazy idea. Us humans are the only ones that can run simulations and look into the future and play out different simulations in our mind before actually doing them in real life. What you're doing when you're thinking is, if you're thinking about how a situation is going to come into existence, what your prefrontal cortex does is you kind of make an avatar of yourself in your mind. And what that avatar does is it runs a simulation in your mind about what's going to come next. And what I mean by that, like for example, if you're going into an interview, you run through that simulation in your head before you go so that you're prepared for each different question. Another example would be if you're about to bring up something to your girlfriend or boyfriend, you know it's going to be an argument, you simulate that in your head. And what I mean by that is you go through all the different options about what they could possibly argue to you about, and you have a rebuttal in your head so you can win the argument. Don't act like you've never done that. So before you actually act in the world, you can watch that simulation in your brain and think about if it's something that you would want to implement or not implement in the world. So you run those different simulations to see what will work and what won't. And if it doesn't work, you don't implement it. And if it does work, that's the option you're going with. And if you think about it, we're the only creatures that can do that. We're the only creatures that can kind of look into the future and see how things will play out. I mean, it's not perfect, but animals, they can't do that. They can't look into the future and see, what do I do different in this situation? What do I do about this? If this happens, I'm going to react like this. They can't do that. They just do. They just have their nature, and they just act on instinct. So you're a strange creature indeed. So another idea that runs along those same lines is you being a collection of subpersonalities. What I mean by that is you're not the same person that you are around different sets of people. So you who are you around your boss is not the same person as you around your parents. That's not the same you as the you in front of your friends, which is very strange because that means that you have different. I like to think of them as like software programs. It's like you're around your friend, run friend software in your head, and that's what you act and project into the world. But if you're around your mom, it's like you better not run that same software of your friend as you are with your mom, because you might curse a little bit more, you might say some things that you don't want to say, and so you switch the program and you switch it to person I am around my mom, and that's what you run in the world. So that's what it means to be an amalgam of different sub-personalities, because you change the way you act in front of different people in the world. Next, we're going to talk about George Herbert Mead, and he had a lot of different ideas about what socializes you throughout your life. First, as a child, you learn through the process of being told what to do and what not to do and how to behave. And so then you apply this info in trial and error, and then you receive feedback from, your parents, your teachers, your friends. And kids play a lot. They pretend play and they act a lot. If you haven't noticed, they'll act like mom. They'll act like a superhero. They'll give themselves different roles, and what they're doing is they're taking on specific roles to learn how to be in the world. George Herbert Mead was the one that coined the term generalized others, and what he meant by that was who you hang out with changes who you are. And we all know this. I had a friend growing up in kindergarten through, we're still friends now, but his name was Ryder. And one of the things that Ryder is very sarcastic. He's a very sarcastic person. He was always skinny growing up, not so much now, but he was skinny growing up. And so one of his defense mechanisms was to be very mouthy and be very rough with his words, I guess you could say. And so whenever I went over to his house and came back, my mom and dad they did not like how I was acting. So I would mimic Ryder, and I would be super sarcastic to my parents afterwards, and they would always be like, maybe we shouldn't be letting Marcus hang out with Ryder as much. So your parents and your friends are the ones socializing you until you grow up and you find a significant other. And the significant other just refers to, your lovey-dovey, your girlfriend, your wife, your boyfriend, whatever you want to call them. So your significant other is actually very useful in socializing you because, well, they can tell you when you're being an idiot. Now, my wife tells me I'm an idiot all the time. Not really, but she lets me know when I am, and that's very useful because you don't want to be an idiot in the world. And so if you have a wife or somebody close to you that's a significant other that can tell you when you're doing something stupid, well, then you can change your actions and then you don't have to be so stupid in the world. This could actually work in a bad way, though, because you don't want your significant other changing you to the core of your being. And we all know someone that's, when they get a girlfriend or boyfriend, they either change into the same person as whoever they're dating, or the girlfriend or boyfriend changes who they are. And that's not good either. So like in most things, you're trying to have a balance, like we learned in last lecture. You don't want somebody that changes the core of your being, but you also want somebody that changes you for the better. think that about wraps it up for today. There's other things in this chapter that I want to get to, but like Sigmund Freud is one of the psychoanalysts I love talking about, but he only got a couple pages, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna go over him in psychology, and I think he needs his own time block. You know, he doesn't deserve a couple minutes. And so same with Eric Erickson. He talks about the stages of development. We're probably going to talk about that next semester in psychology. So yeah, hopefully you guys are in my psychology class so we can talk about that. But yeah, that wraps it up for today. Well, thanks for listening and have a happy Tuesday.